we've been going over Election Overview 2022. In our last installment, we're going to find out what's happening on the ground. We've been talking with commentators, analysts, and political professionals and pundits. Now we'll find out what's happening on the field. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We'll be right back in just a moment. Welcome back. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. We're so happy that you're joining us on this beautiful Sunday morning in the great region of Hampton Roads, the great city of Norfolk, Virginia. And as we broadcast live on the campus of the largest HBCU and the best in the nation in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Norfolk State University, on WNSB Hot 91, the soul of VA. As always, we have with us in studio our producer, Marvin Folks, also known as DJ Scandalous, that you can hear on this station live every day, Monday through Friday from 2 to 6 p.m. And listen, I tuned in on Saturday, and I hear you on there as well. So he's keeping us right and tight.
Yep, Saturdays 11 to 3, and newly Sundays with the live and local show playing local artists for 1 hour straight, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. today. Tune in.
All right. Listen, we always like to bring it up and change things. Our station manager and the whole crew are doing a phenomenal job ensuring that we are the soul of VA. And we are just that, the soul of VA and all that you do. Well, you know, this is Stay the Water. And one thing that we like to do with this show is bring movers, shakers, and policymakers to you to discuss issues important to the community. And what we've done in the month of July, and we've actually done this the last couple of years because we're going into our third year of the show. Can you believe that? We finished 2 whole seasons. And we like to take a quick election overview of what's going to happen in November. That's right. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, there's an important election every year, and even more so every 2 years. In the even number years, in the 22s and the 24s, 26, 28s, and the 30s, we've got a major national election, and this year is no different. We are going to reelect every single congressperson or elect every single congressperson in the United States, including those that are located here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we've got some important local races as well. We're going to elect a new mayor of one of the peninsula cities and also some city council persons here in the Commonwealth here in the city of Norfolk. And we're going to hear from them coming up in the months coming up to the election in the month of August and September, and then also November as we talk about our Get Out the Vote show. And it's going to be impactful. You know, again, we bring the candidates to you to talk about what's happening, what's really going on. But as I mentioned in the introduction, the entire month we've been talking with political pundits, political analysts, and commentators about, you know, Election Overview 2022 and what's important and what's going on. You know, but today I've got a special guest with us. You know, he's a phenomenal, dynamic young man who has risen through the ranks in politics. And right now he is a congressional political field director, and he's on the ground. And he's going to tell us what's going on the ground in the Commonwealth of Virginia as it relates to election 2022. Ronell Chatmon, thank you so much for joining us here on Stay the Water.
Dr. Claville, thank you. It's great to be on with you, and it's a pleasure being here.
Absolutely. Now, I would like to tell everybody this is also a special moment for me because, Ronell, you're actually one of my former students.
Yes, that is right. Almost 11 years now. I sat in that first class with you, political and the judicial process. Time is flying by.
It is. And definitely one of our best and brightest that I've had a chance to encounter. A phenomenal, dynamic young man, and I'm so proud of everything that you're doing. And when I talked about you rising through the ranks of politics and really behind the scenes on the ground, I remember, you volunteering on the ground for campaigns as a student, and then from there, working your way through. And right now, you're actually a congressional field director, for a U.S. congressperson. And you're on the ground now directing and finding out what's happening in the community, and from that unique perspective, I want to find out from you, what would you tell, and from your standpoint, what's the importance of the midterm elections? And from your view on the ground, how are the Dems and Republicans doing nationally and in the Commonwealth of Virginia?
Right. Yes, the midterm elections are extremely, extremely important. Whenever citizens, they have the opportunity to exercise their right to vote, we need to all do that, especially during these pertinent times. And not just from a federal perspective, there's much candor to saying, all politics is local. And that's why I was glad when you just mentioned the city council and the mayor elections down there in the Tidewater area that are taking place. We need to make sure we're learning about and voting for candidates at the town, city, county, and state levels, right, along with our school boards and judges in some states, those that will be beneficial to our communities and convey values and policy that we believe in. That's why I'm so glad you're doing this series during the summer to keep us woke and informed, as many are in the midst of getting their summers back and extremely busy after being severely restricted due to COVID the last couple of years.
Right.
Now, in the Commonwealth, the Democrats have remained strong, holding their one-vote edge in the state Senate. They've been the Gestapo, the last line of defense so far against Republicans and Governor Youngkin's agenda. State senators like Louise Lucas, Jennifer Boysko, Dr. Mamie Locke, one of my former professors as well, Lionel Sproul, and others have banded together shooting down regressive legislation. So the state of the water will be extremely heated in next year's state election. But nevertheless, I have to say today, July 31st, marks the countdown of the 100th day before the November 8th midterm election.
That's right.
And historically, midterm elections are important because they provide voters with the opportunity to address the issues while they express their deepest concerns at the ballot box. And the people have the opportunity through Congress and within their states to change the party in power. And as the late, great Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. So particularly when you look at the last midterm election in 2018, there was a demand for equality. There was a demand for women in office in retrospect to many issues. And for the first time in this country, over 90 women were elected to Congress, which is a record in this country. It had never been done before. And also in that 2018 midterm election, we saw voter turnout like we hadn't seen anything close to since the 60s. Since the 1960s, Dr. Claville, and those were turbulent times at stake where we had the Vietnam War going on, taking place, and in even those elections, that was before the 26th Amendment, so citizens under the age of 21 weren't even allowed to vote.
Wow. And
even then, voter turnout in the midterm elections in the 60s ranged from 45 to 48%, while today's elections are higher. 2018's voter turnout was 50%, the highest turnout for a midterm election in over a century. Now, from a national vantage point, I see Democrats are hoping with recent Supreme Court rulings and insurrection January 6th hearings, they'll get a high voter turnout similar to 2018 because traditionally speaking, high voter turnout favors them. Republicans are pushing the inflation narrative, but in terms of the state of the parties and how they're doing right now, I believe they're both dealing with issues of today domestically and globally and trying to deliver a message to the people to address their concerns. And that has not been easy to do without pointing the finger at the other side when the people need them to sit down, settle their differences, work together, and get more done. There are over 12,000 bills and resolutions before Congress right now. And in this 117th Congress, there have been just 419 bills and joint resolutions that have become law. So address that stagnation and their messaging for the concerns of the people instead of just going back and forth. Because I tell you, if the concerns of the people for both parties are not addressed in an impactful manner, particularly for the Democrats, the state of the water may look like Flint, Michigan's water quality from 3 years ago at the conclusion of this midterm and heading into 2024.
Wow. Right now you've given us a lot to really think about, and you've actually laid out the, the slate and the foundation of really what's at stake, here in this particular election coming up. You mentioned the one vote block in the Senate that the Democrats have, and you mentioned the amount of bills that are currently in Congress, right? We're talking state Senate, and then we're talking Congress. And then we're also looking at U.S. Senate, of course, with Joe Manchin and things that are taking place, going back and forth, thinking that the Democratic agenda would move expeditiously, but there have been stops there. So, with all of these back messages, all these things in the forefront, as a field director, what are you seeing as concerns for the citizens and voters?
Yeah. Now, as a field director, I love to have my ear to the street, and I'm thankful to be involved with the community every day. Typically, 7 days out of the week, I'm meeting with union leaders like the AFL-CIO, SEIU, who, by the way, helped in a tremendous victory to SEIU this month in Richmond. City workers finally being able to have the right to collectively bargain.
Right.
That's very important. But I also sit down with the heartbeat of the constituents, which is the volunteers. Also, local elected officials, their staffs, endorsers, PACs, small business groups, community leaders. And what I'm seeing is the concerns are the prices rising and wages are not keeping up. Many people in Virginia are familiar with issues globally due to so many involved in the military as constituents. But issues domestically are the primary concern right now. Women's reproductive rights, I cannot stress that enough. Privacy rights, gun safety is a major issue. And education is another big issue I'm seeing every day here in Northern Virginia, as many are concerned about children returning to school after the last few years of doing remote learning. And teachers have noticed in the past year that many of their students are behind grade level or, quite frankly, not functioning how they used to. So I'm in constant communication with my congressmen that I work for, serving them data and discussing legislation. We're doing polls, surveys all the time to try to get legislation passed that will allocate tax dollars that constituents pay that will be beneficial to them back home.
Absolutely. It's so very important when we take a look at what's going on, because at the end of the day, you mentioned earlier, all politics is local, right? And it's all about the one man, one person, one vote. That's a great thing about our democracy. And, you've brought up some major issues, of course. We all go to the gas station. We all go to the grocery store, every week. This is something that none of us can avoid if you're operating in society. So when you talk about prices and you talk about what's going on in the Supreme Court, that is absolutely huge. It's Stay the Water. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Claville. For the entire month of July, we've been doing our annual election overview 2022 for the midterm elections here nationally for every congressional seat in the country and the Commonwealth of Virginia, and also for local races where we will elect a new mayor for one of the cities here on the peninsula, city council persons, and individuals of different boards and municipalities. Joining us, we have with us Congressional Field Director Ronell Chatmon, who's given us an idea of what's going on the ground. We've talked with political commentators, analysts, pundits, but he's telling us what's happening as he goes door to door and talk with citizens that are working every single day. Ronell, as we start to gear up, for the election and and individuals are going to start knocking on doors. We're going to start to see a lot of political campaigns, advertisements going on television. Of course, we know that the Labor Day is usually the time where that happens. From your viewpoint, what's really at stake for Republicans and Democrats congressional races, both nationally and also let's look at specifically Virginia here. And as we start to focus on these congressional races, I want to take a look at these issues of critical race theory, which I think is miseducation, Trumpism, and January 6th or J6 hearing, and then any other issues that you see coming up.
Yeah. So just on a national scale, you talked about some of the other races that are taking place from a local perspective. Now, there will be 36 governorships, races taking place in 30 state attorney general offices on ballots. Of the 36 governorships, 20 of them are currently occupied by Republicans. And although these states' positions might seem less important than the congressional seats, with this being a midterm election and focus on those federal seats, winning a majority in these areas would allow Democrats to pursue liberal legislation outside of Washington, D.C., because we have seen over the last 2 years voting rights, legislation, restrictive laws to deter people from having access to the ballot. Those are passed inside of the state. And those laws are passed there. So when you look at that, and then you also have the legislation on contraceptives that different states are passing in Texas and such. So these things are very important. We need to make sure that those governorships and those state attorney general offices, people are voting, not just voting for the first couple of candidates, but all the candidates and knowing who they actually are, because these states, they pass their own individual laws. Now, nationally, Democrats only control the House by 5 seats, and in Virginia, 3 of those congressional seats are in limbo, according to national reports. And that's right here at home. Elaine Loria, who's in the 2nd District down in Virginia Beach area where you all are. Abigail Spanberger in the 7th District. Her district has changed a lot from primarily northern and western suburbs of Richmond to now having mainly Prince William County. And this is because of the redistricting that is taking place from the census. And Jennifer Wexton in the 10th District, and mainly in Loudoun County, Northern Virginia, she lost many precincts in Fairfax County. So as I talked about earlier, with women being in these congressional seats, winning a lot of the elections in 2018 and 2020, they're up. And these are going to be battleground seats, and the Democrats can't lose those 5 seats. If they lose the 5, then it will turn over to the Republican side. So that's what I'm mainly concerned about. But the messaging is the main thing.
Yes.
Democrats need to just make sure that they are talking about the things that they have gotten done, so that people are able to see what is the plan moving forward and how they have made progress. The messaging is very important moving forward.
I just want to hit messaging, right? It's all about, of course, we know the statistics. You know what's going on on the ground. We know what's going on behind the scenes. We know how hard, our elected officials work on both sides of the aisle. But really, at the end of the day, Ronell, it's all about messaging and packaging. How do you think that the Republicans and Democrats are doing with their messaging and getting their voters to the polls right now?
Well, I think, just like I talked about earlier, the Republicans are utilizing the message of inflation, and that is a way to try to attack the other side. The messaging, from what I see, is attacking each other's side, more so than allocating or showing what it is that you have done and what you plan to do. Particularly on the Democrat side, they passed a lot of legislation just this summer. The Federal Reserve Racial and Economic Act of 2022 in June. The Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order in June as well. Protecting Our Kids Act, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act of 2022 that they passed in late June. Ensuring Access to Abortion Act. All these different things are very important. The Active Shooter Alert Act. So Women's Health Protection Act as well is great things that they can package in this upcoming election.
Right.
Moving forward. And inflation on the other side, by sharply raising interest rates, we see all the time that the Feds are hoping to tamper down consumer demand, which has overwhelmed supply, driving prices up. So with that, we see that Republicans just continue to make it known that, hey, this inflation keeps going up. You don't want to continue to keep voting on what is not working.
Right.
You're not making the money to keep up with this inflation, but yet people keep spending. People continue to keep spending, and that's why the Feds keep doing this. But it's not also their fault. It's the banks. The banks as well. They're not going to lose their profits based off of what happened with COVID over the last few years.
Right.
And they're continuing to lend and continue to lend. Now, the Supreme Court also, the Supreme Court decisions, that could be used in messaging moving forward. They struck down a decision that had been law in this land over 50 years by overturning Roe versus Wade and diminishing reproductive rights, diminishing state gun safety laws by ruling that states requiring a necessary approval for a license to carry concealed weapons in public places is unconstitutional. And they diminish climate action by limiting the Environmental Protection Agency's ability to curb power plant emissions. So that, and not to mention, we've seen more mass shootings take place, even during our nation's holiday, July the 4th.
In your home,
back home where I'm from,
right there in
the
home
Chicagoland area.
That's right. Wow. When you talk about gun safety and climate change, look, I don't know about you, but this has been the hottest summer I've ever experienced in my life. According to the record books, it's the hottest ever recorded. We've got heat waves across Europe. We've got heat waves here in the Northeast. I have people telling me that are traveled to Florida and others. They say it's hotter here than it is in Florida, where they were. I mean, the Sunshine State of all places. So for people to say that climate change is not real, I say, hey, just step outside for about 5 minutes and see how long you last. With these changing laws, I mean, just from your viewpoint, we talk about mass shootings, and you mentioned the mass shooting that took place in your home state of Illinois, on a major holiday. How does that affect the people from your viewpoint to know that even though these mass shootings continue to take place, gun safety laws are continuing to be eroded by legislators?
Yeah, the amount of mass shootings, just talking about that in particular, there's been one every single week since the beginning of the year. And data has shown that, but there are a lot of them that's not being reported. Of course, we see that there are, in especially black and brown neighborhoods, access to guns has been an issue. But when it hits home in different communities, at educational facilities, okay, at our schools and community centers, and kids' lives are being taken away at such a young age, then that's when we see a bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That's when we will see that this type of legislation can be passed, because where did that take place? In Texas, you had the Uvalde shooting. It's in your own backyard. It's tragic that these situations do happen for this type of legislation to finally get passed. And, me being born as, a 90s baby in the early 90s, we saw that they had banned the assault rifles in the early 90s, but it was only a 10-year span.
That's right.
And this was the first piece of legislation that had been passed to try to limit some of these issues that we're dealing with, and also mental health as well. Mental health services is very important. This is also guaranteed inside of this legislation. That needs to be packaged. That needs to be let known to the people in their messaging for Democrats moving forward and what they can possibly do down the line over the next 2 years heading into a federal election. But the climate change, as you talked about, we had a Build Back Better Act last year.
That's right.
That would have done a lot to focus on climate change moving forward.
Yeah.
Dealing with our forest fires out in California in the West, dealing with our water issues around this country with lead pipes inside of schools and inside of people's homes, and actually dealing with the problem that we have with demand, because our supply is not where it needs to be. That Build Back Better Act would have helped in that supply. That's part of why we're seeing the inflation that we see today. But it wasn't passed.
Wow. It's a lot to unpack. But one thing that we do know is that your vote matters. We saw this in the last presidential election, and we've seen it here in the Commonwealth of Virginia in the last gubernatorial election. The margin of victory has been extremely, extremely thin. We're talking less than 3% for these major races. So, Ronell, you've given us a lot to really think about and a lot to let us know what's going on the ground, because that's where the rubber meets the road. It doesn't matter how much money you raise. It doesn't matter how many commercials you have. The question becomes, what are the voters, the citizens, concerned about, and how they're going to vote in the booth? So in our last minute or two, I want you to look through your crystal ball, Ronell's crystal ball, and let us know, how do you foresee the election going? How the House, do they keep it? The Senate, does it flip? And here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, what happens to those races, those three important races that you mentioned that are up for grabs?
So, put me on the spot, Dr. Claville. Well, I will say this. I try to remain optimistic as much as possible, and I always try to remain on the side of right. And I will say that with everything that has taken place over the last few months, it's going to drive up turnout, and I'm hoping that it will drive it up, and we will keep the House. The statistics show that's probably not going to happen, but I surely hope that it does. And in the Senate, we will be able to either hold where we're at or move forward. Democrats will be able to gain more seats. Now, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you're looking at Lane Laurie, like I talked about, Abigail Spanberger, and Jennifer Wexton. Now, we have our strong faithful like Congressman Bobby Scott. We have Jerry Conley. We have Don Biden. We have those. But I believe that Abigail Spanberger is sitting in the best position where she's at. She's got Prince William County, which Jerry Conley used to have, and that is a very Democratic area. Jennifer Wexton as well, and they've run phenomenal campaigns so far. They're putting money where their mouth is.
Absolutely. And
they are organizing appropriately. I think the most vulnerable is, Lane Laurie at this point.
Yeah.
And she needs as much help as she can through redistricting and different areas that she's garnered from the census that took place.
Well, Ronell, we thank you for joining us here on State of the Water. You know what? That's our theme music. That means we've got to go. But we're going to have you back. We're going to have you back. And again, continue doing what you're doing and let us know what's happening on the ground. But coming up, we've got a phenomenal segment with my good friend Blair Durham from Black Brands, Black Wall Street, for economic upward mobility. Stay tuned. We'll see you next week. This is your host, Dr. Eric Claville from State of Water. God bless, be great, and we'll see you next Sunday.